Adequacy is providing sufficient resources to educate all students to high, rigorous state standards. There are 4 methods for determining adequacy. The first is the professional judgment or consensus approach. It takes educational professionals identifying components of a prototype school that they believe would enable staff to teach students to some predetermined performance standard. The components of this plan are then costed out, and then that's used to determine what is an adequate financial base. The one drawback is that this approach does not provide for much differentiation between the average school and one with a high concentration of at-risk students. The second approach is the successful school district approach. This is a method that uses they look at schools that meet specific outcomes as a model for determining appropriate spending. This method is less complicated because it doesn't rely on statistical methods to obtain that adequate spending number. It omits outliers because it leaves out large urban areas, very wealthy and very poor districts, as well as small rural systems. The findings for successful school districts paints a picture of average size, non-urban, with little student diversity, and they tend to spend less than the state average. So this method or formula artificially lowers the cost for what it is to achieve success. The third approach is the economic cost function. It uses statistical modeling to determine the cost of achieving selected student outcomes while relating it to the school district's resources. It incorporates and reflects personal and community values. According to this method, adequate spending levels are close to the median spending level in the state if the researchers select average student proficiency levels. The author does caution that average has many different levels. So this takes us to the fourth approach. It's the state-of-art approach. In this one, it's a combination of the best parts of all the other methods. It uses research findings on student achievement seen in high-achieving schools, identifies components needed for those research-identified teaching and learning strategies, determines a cost basis for each strategy, and then decides what an adequate spending base should be. So that takes us to our case study. We were comparing Alpha High School versus Omega High School, and we're trying to determine, are we getting adequate funding? So this isn't the first time that you've seen these numbers. So let's start with the per pupil spending. So for Alpha High School, it is $6,000 per pupil. At Omega, it's $7,625. Okay, and we're going to just go forward. This is a snippet that I took on per pupil spending by state. So it's not all states, but I just took, if you look over here, you can see that 6,000 is below any of these total per pupil spendings. And then the Omega would be only the fourth lowest. There's only 3 other numbers below their spending per pupil. So it is my belief, based on these numbers, that Omega might be receiving adequate funding, but Alpha is not. Now, that's just based on that. There's a couple things that we have to read into in this case study, and that would be the demographics, diversity, right? If Omega High School, which seems like it's a very average and one of the schools that the successful school district approach would provide funding for, very non-diverse or limited diversity with high achieving students, so they can get more done with less. However, they're still getting more than Alpha High School. So at Alpha High School, special consideration should be given to the number of English language learners, the number of students that are economically disadvantaged, and the number of special education students. So I have a feeling that these were not taken into consideration when providing funding at Alpha High School. So the conclusion here is that adequate funding is not being provided based on the information that we have on hand.